everybody. Welcome to another episode of Everyday Strong with Dr. Michael G. Daniels. This is your host, C.B. Baker. Dr. Daniels, I was a little rusty on the beginning. It's been a minute since we've had one. Yeah. But I tell you what, it's I got some good news. The good news is the podcast is now on Spreaker, which is a platform that's able to get the podcast out to other platforms. It's like a middleman, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
And we're now deep in Ireland and France and all of Europe now. So we're now picked up there. We're now on Spotify. We're still continuing to be on iTunes, and we're still on SoundCloud. So if you're following us on SoundCloud, nothing is changing. I've mirrored the feed on SoundCloud, so you have to change anything. But I do encourage everybody, if you have an iPhone, go up there to the podcast app, leave a review. That gets us seen more, and we're able to do. Apple's doing way more stuff now with what their podcast. You know, everybody was complaining about it, so Apple fixed it. Right. But in Spotify, when I uploaded it, we had over 150 downloads the first hour.
Wow, that's great. That's wonderful.
So people are hungry for it, and they really want the information. So with all that being said, what we're talking about today, Dr. Daniels?
Well, first of all, let me say it's good to be back. You know, we took a little break, and I know people have been asking me, when we're going to come back from the summer break. So it's great to be back. And as you echoed, I want to echo what you said, that pass the word around and, do what you can to continue to let people know that we are here on this podcast. One thing I wanted to talk about today, a subject that, is clear in our national agenda, that there seems to be an uptick in, I guess I would say, covert and overt racism, that the idea of a super class or an upper class is permeating our society now, either because of the climate of our political scene or for whatever reason, whatever you want to attribute it to,
right.
That's happening. The interesting thing about that is when you think about, segregationists and racism, Martin Luther King said, over 50 years ago, he said that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most racist or the most segregated hour of the week. The irony of it is it was true then and it's still true now.
Right.
Even though there are some churches that are, integrated, multicultural, by and large, most churches are either, Hispanic or Black or white, or Asian.
Right.
Right. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, why is that? Why is it that, in 2019, where all of us say we're Christians worshiping the same God, that we still feel the need to segregate ourselves on Sunday to worship a God who we say created all?
The funny thing about it, this past Sunday, I got up early and I went to go jogging on the track by Jolliffe. Mm-hmm. And when you go into Jolliffe High School, Jolliffe School, you pass by this community church, big church that's there. And, I saw like a couple of Black families out there. So I came in and asked my wife, I said, if your uncle wasn't the pastor, would you continue to go to Enoch, or would you go to church around here, but all the churches within our vicinity are all white? She was like, no, because they're white. And I asked the question, I said, but why? She said, well, I wouldn't feel comfortable. And it's funny that you mentioned that to me the other day, like when you had to do this topic. And I was like, that is interesting, that why don't we as Black Americans, African Americans, feel comfortable sitting in a white church as a whole?
Right. Well, I can tell you the response I get, and I can tell you some response I have received down through the years.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a good example. I think one is because we don't always feel like we will be welcomed, or we feel like the welcome will be superficial,
Right.
And so that's the one thing. And I can tell you, you mentioned the church in Jolliffe, and it just so happens that there's another church in that same neighborhood where the pastor used to be in a conference that I was in.
Okay.
And when we was having a conference meeting, and we were talking about the idea of, exchanging cultures and, why can't we worship more as a unit? And so one of the pastors who happened to be a priest, he was the Catholic priest, and he made a suggestion. He said, well, why don't we exchange one Sunday churches per se? Why don't we as the leaders in the church go and serve at another church, that is not either our denomination,
right,
or that is not our present culture? His only comment was that because how the Catholic diocese is set up, he said, I will have to be at my church when you come, but you will still be the one delivering the message, and so on and so on. Well, the pastor at the church in Jolliffe, which was an all-white church, he said point blank, he said, I wouldn't have a problem going to any of you all churches. And he looked at the priest who happened to be white. He said, you can come to my church. And he looked at a couple of other guys and said, but they can't come. He said, it's not because I don't love them.
Right.
He said, my congregation would get rid of me and would not allow them to speak. And this is a church that's in Jolliffe.
Wow.
It just so happens I knew.
Right.
I'm 3 or 4 blocks from where his church is at.
Right.
And that is kind of amazing, that we still have that. I don't know if a part of it is stereotypes. I don't know if a part of it is still that sense of superiority, or I don't get what it is. I think that by and large, and I could be wrong because I've only been black. I've never been white.
Right.
I think that by and large, Black communities are more receptive to receiving other people. We tend to be a little more forgiving. We tend to want to assimilate. But I don't get the impression that white America wants to assimilate. By and large, they want, they don't like that idea. And even 2019, I still face that same thing with my brothers who are pastors of white churches. And I'll give you another quick example now, let you jump on in, is that we currently belong to a conference, which is called the Bridge Network of Churches. This network of churches was previously, and most of them were Southern Baptists, which Southern Baptists is primarily, a white group. At any rate, we were in a class where we were talking about revitalization of churches and that kind of thing. And the president of the conference, he made a statement that I found, extremely welcome for myself, and spoke volumes of him, because he's a white pastor. And he said that he was talking to his congregation. He said to them, if you really want to be more inclusive, then you need to understand something, that the way we present ourselves excludes minorities. He said, look at the picture that we have of Jesus. It shows Jesus as blue eyes with long curly blonde hair.
Right.
And he said, we know, talking to a group of pastors, we know that Jesus was not blue eyed and did not have long curly blonde hair. We know based on the region of the country he came from, and we know based on the biblical description of him, that, he was a brown-skinned individual. And as a matter of fact, the Bible says he had his kind of bronze color, right? A hair like lamb's wool, which, isn't straight, at all.
No.
So, so he said that, and he said he'd tell his congregation, we need to take that picture down. So people who are coming in who are of other cultures don't find it offensive. One of the pastors in the back, one of the white guys, he said, I bet they told you that you were fired too the next day, didn't they? And he said it in a joking way, but when he said it, all the white pastors laughed. It wasn't a laugh like, even though it was joking, it was a laugh like, a confirmation kind of deal. Sometimes you laugh because something has to be, hey, I can't believe you said it to a white congregation. Because this church is in Blackwater, which is, it's not a contemporary congregation. He said, no, I explained to them that, this is what the Bible says. Therefore, we ought to make sure the church is, more receiving. So they did move the picture, and they replaced it with a picture that covered the entire wall, but it had, a sheep, in a pasture, which was soothing to the eye, more comforting, I guess, to everyone. And of course, we are the sheep of his pasture, so
Right.
it resembles something that the Bible verse says. The point is that those other pastors clearly are saying that they are uncomfortable even letting their congregation know what the Bible says.
Right.
As it relates to who Jesus really was, what his real complexion was. So if you are afraid to tell your congregation a truth, I can understand why, if the leadership, is afraid, to be honest, how can we expect those that are following, to be receptive as well?
Yeah, and that's the one thing that's really disturbing, is that the leader, like if you've been chosen to be the pastor of the church, you've been chosen to lead the church, you should be allowed to lead, which is being honest with everybody. And I'm pretty sure that God would want you to be honest with everybody about what's in the Bible. He didn't put it in the Bible for you to kind of skirt around certain things. He put it in there for it to be in there, for you to follow it. So have you, Pastor Daniels, have you ever come to a situation to where you yourself said, if I told the absolute truth on this, I may lose some people in the church or I will catch some backflash? Now, I already know you. You're not short of an opinion. Okay.
Never been short of an
opinion. But have you ever been like, maybe I shouldn't say that, or you kind of massaged it a little bit?
I'll say this. There was a time when my wife would tell me, I can't believe you said that. You need to go back and retract that statement. I can't believe you said that. I have never felt the need to sugarcoat. I haven't, simply because I understand that most people, what they know of the Bible is not what they read, but what they heard. I'm not saying everybody doesn't read, but I'm just, for most people, it's what you hear from the pulpit that kind of shapes you and guides you. And so I know that most people in the congregation are going off what they have heard. Similarly, I'm not saying that all my, white brothers don't want to, have a church that is accepting. I'm not saying that, but there is a fear, I think, for some of them. But then for some of them, it may also be that, they still have that hint of, Jesus was blonde, blue-eyed. I don't know. I don't know. I like to think that's not the case. I think it's what you just said, which is maybe there's just some hesitation because they don't want to lose members. They don't want people to think negatively of them if they are honest, if they don't kind of be more receptive. Church is not, unfortunately, church is more than just about the Bible, studying the Bible. Church is also about worship, right? It's about worship. And so if we're going to make our worship so that it's receptive to everybody, then that means we also have to look at how we worship, Right. Do we look at the way blacks traditionally worship and say, we don't want that? Or do we look at the way whites worship and say, we don't want that? Or do we try to say, listen, worship should be universal? And I think it should be universal. Sometimes when people look at black churches, they equate it with, shouting and speaking in tongues and falling out, this kind of thing. That's not a black church phenomenon. That's a Pentecostal church, kind of way that they worship. White Pentecostals and black Pentecostals tend to worship the same way. Black Baptists and white Baptists tend to worship the same way. Black Methodists and white Methodists tend to worship the same way. Black Episcopals and white Episcopals tend to worship the same way. So it's really not about whether or not I'm black or white. It's more about what denomination I fall under. But you wouldn't think that when you're talking to people, because they act like if you're black, I don't care what church you go to, the church is going to last 5 hours. It's going to be that long service and one song is going to take 30 minutes. And that's not true. It really isn't. So I think it's that, and I think it's just that uncomfortability, because if I'm worshiping with you, I got to hold your hand. I gotta hug you. I gotta put down some feelings that I may have had. And I think I personally just think it's hard for some people to do. It's hard for some people to reconcile that concept and say, you know what? We really want you to come. Because if you're in a traditional church, and, do they really want the crackhead to come in who is still fighting the addiction, who is still not dressed well, this kind of thing.
Right.
And do you really want to hear what the other culture has to say? See, I have not found and again, this is me, I'm not talking about the whole world because I can only speak for myself.
Right.
I have not found a white pastor other than the church that we affiliate with, which is Good Samaritan, that is really willing to openly and honestly discuss the plight of segregation in this country and racism in this country, and to try to really understand how it affects other people, and I think that's a big part of the problem, is that people don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to openly admit or hear that, what you're doing is somewhat racist. You may have good intentions, but it's still somewhat racist. And I'll give you another quick example. This past Saturday, I was at a football game, my wife and I, and I sat beside a gentleman who was Presbyterian. Now, we both acknowledge, number one, I'm Baptist and you Presbyterian. And I'm sitting down, and it's college football, ODU against Norfolk State. And so I'm an alumnus of Old Dominion. So I have an ODU hat on. I have an ODU t-shirt on, and that's blue. Norfolk State colors are green and gold.
Right.
We sit down, and I have a water jug in my hand that was given to me when I entered the gate. The water jug says U.S. Army on it.
Right.
So it's Army green with the star on it.
Mm-hmm.
We sit down and we're talking, and the gentleman says to me, so, you think Norfolk State might win? And I said, no, I think ODU's going to get them. And he said, so when were you at Norfolk State? And I said, I'm an ODU alumnus.
Right.
He said, oh, I thought you went to Norfolk State. And I said, no, I got from ODU. And he said, well, I was looking at your water bottle, and it was green.
Right.
And I took my shirt and kind of did like this and said, and he said, oh, it does say Monarch on it. And I got an ODU hat on,
right,
and an ODU shirt on. Mm-hmm. And I know it wasn't the water ball that told him. That was him catching himself.
Right.
See, he didn't see the blue.
Right.
All he saw was the black.
The black, right.
And in seeing the black, he just assumed you graduated from Norfolk State. See, I think that the reality of life is that people say we are beyond seeing color. That's not true. He still saw my color first. And just seeing my color, he overlooked all the big blue stuff I had on that said Old Dominion Monarchs.
And which is a shame that it's like that. I played at Oklahoma and then transferred to Southern. And I will say it is two completely different worlds. Mm-hmm. Same college football, but two completely different worlds when it comes to stuff like that. Now, let's see if we could somewhat see what the problem is. I believe, Dr. Daniels, that with white people not wanting to worship with black people and really looking in the Bible, I think is messing with their insecurities. Mm-hmm. It's like they don't want to confront their insecurities.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. And in this, let's just be real. Like we was talking over the weekend about athletic ability and things like that. Mm-hmm. White people tend to not be as athletic, as a general statement.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That could be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's an insecurity. Now, me, like you said, we've been black all our lives.
All my life.
Right. So we don't walk around saying, oh, well, this is a basketball goal. Let me go dunk the basketball. Or let me go, you don't think in that terms.
Right. Yeah.
if they are insecure about themselves, because when we come around, and God forbid if we talk with some intelligence, not a dang, or we show that we are very intelligent, well-mannered, well-spoken, it becomes a major problem, because now we are messing with the stereotype that they have in their head of us, and then also messing with the pedestal they put themselves on.
Right.
So with that being said, is it more or less them not wanting to belittle themselves, or they don't want to raise us up?